The air on Concordance Station was a meticulously crafted lie. It smelled of petrichor and blossoming Lunarian moon vines, a scent profile voted upon and approved by the Interspecies Harmony Committee 3 cycles ago. It was a pleasant, neutral aroma designed to soothe the olfactory senses of the station's 37 resident species. Kalin, analyst-historian of the Xylosian enclave, found it profoundly dishonest. Truth in Kalin's crystalline form resonated as a series of pure, interlocking frequencies. The air on Concordance was a symphony of dissonance, a forced chord of agreeability that set his own internal lattices vibrating with a low, grating hum. He modulated his perception, focusing instead on the gravitational currents in the grand concourse. Below him, delegates and their aides drifted like colorful plankton in a slow-moving river. The hulking, chitinous form of Ambassador Vorlag of the Gethar hegemony moved with ponderous purpose, his multifaceted eyes scanning the crowds. Vorlag was a creature of the tangible, a being who understood mass, velocity, and political leverage. He and Kalin were, by any measure, an unlikely pair of associates. Yet for 2 decades, they had found a strange symbiosis in their shared efforts to navigate the treacherous currents of galactic diplomacy. "The humans are late," Vorlag's voice boomed, not through the air but as a direct, tight-beam transmission into Kalin's receptive matrix. The Gethar disdained common broadcast for sensitive matters. Their mineral rights proposal for the Cygnus arm is already 3 rotations overdue. It is inefficient, filtered the meaning from the transmission. Inefficiency was the greatest sin in the Gethar's communal, hive-like society. The humans do not perceive time as a resource to be optimized, Vorlag. They perceive it as a space to be filled, often with what they call due diligence. Or, more frequently, internal debate. Debate, Vorlag scoffed. A species that cannot agree with itself has no place negotiating the fate of star systems. Kalin could formulate a reply. A new frequency cut through the station's ambient hum. It was a high, piercing tone, a sound reserved for only the most severe alerts. A security override, a quarantine breach. Or this, throughout the grand concourse, the slow, diplomatic dance ceased. Every being, from the silicon-based Pyrians to the gaseous Hellions swirling in their containment fields, turned towards the main viewports. The station's external holoscreens, which usually displayed blooming nebulae or calming stellar phenomena, flickered and resolved into a single, stark image. A human cruiser, the UNS Sol Invictus, sleek and severe against the stardusted velvet of space. It was not on any schedule. An automated, synthesized voice, stripped of all inflection, echoed through the concourse. Human vessel UNS Sol Invictus has assumed priority docking trajectory under Mandate 7. All other traffic is suspended. All active negotiations are hereby paused. A wave of agitated murmurings rippled through the crowd. Vorlag's physical form stiffened, his massive pincers clicking in irritation. Mandate 7, arrogance, insufferable arrogance. Kalin felt a different sensation, a cold resonance that vibrated through his core structure. He had read about this. His historical archives were filled with data, but data was a poor substitute for the chilling reality. He watched as the Invictus's docking ramp extended. A single figure emerged. She was small, by galactic standards, wrapped in the severe black and silver uniform of the human diplomatic corps. Her face was pale, her expression a mask of grim professionalism. But it was not the woman who held the attention of every sentient being on Concordance Station. It was what she carried. Held firmly in her left hand, pressed against her side like a vital organ, was a folder. A simple, physical artifact made of processed wood pulp and dyed a shade of arterial red. The red folder. The sight of it sent a final, declarative shockwave through the station. On the massive display boards where dozens of trade pacts, territorial disputes, and cultural exchange programs had been listed, the text vanished. It was replaced by a single, repeating phrase in every known galactic language, NEGOTIATEONS PAUSED by Human Strategic Projection Mandate. Unacceptable, Vorlag transmitted, his fury a sharp, percussive blast. They cannot simply halt the workings of the entire Galactic Council on a whim. The Centaurian Water Rights Treaty can, Kalin interrupted, his own transmission quiet, almost a whisper. And they have. This is not a whim, Vorlag. This is protocol. The human ambassador, Eva Rostova, walked down the ramp with a steady, measured gait. She did not look at the assembled crowd. Her eyes were fixed forward, as if sighting a target far in the distance. Station security, a mix of robotic sentinels and burly Vorn peacekeepers, formed a cordon around her, their movements stiff and automatic. They escorted her not to the diplomatic suites, but to the isolated human sector, its blast doors sliding shut behind her with a sound of profound finality. The red folder had entered the station, and with it conversation had died, replaced by a suffocating blanket of suspense. For the next 10 hours, Concordance Station existed in a state of suspended animation. No treaties were debated. No tariffs were adjusted. The work of 1,000 diplomats from 36 worlds ground to a halt, held hostage by a single piece of red paper in a sealed room. Kalen and Vorlag sat in the Xylosian sector, a quiet space of polished obsidian and soft, resonant light. Vorlag paced, his heavy footfalls a dull thud against the vibration-dampening floor. "It is a power play," the Gthar rumbled. "A tactic to disrupt our negotiations and give them an advantage when talks resume. They want us agitated, unfocused." "It is not a tactic," Kalen resonated, his thoughts slow and deliberate. "It is a statement of perceived fact. That is the function of the red folders. They are not threats. They are what the humans call strategic projections. Inevitable outcomes. Inevitability is the purview of physics, not politics," Vorlag countered. "Humans do not see a distinction," Kalen replied. "To them, complex systems, be they stellar mechanics or interspecies relations, are governed by variables. If you can identify all the variables, you can project the outcome. When their projections reach a certainty threshold of 99.9 recurring percent, they issue a red folder. It is their way of saying, the game is already over. Here is the final score. Continuing to play is illogical." Vorlag stopped pacing. "I have heard the stories, the T-Core conflict." "A skirmish, barely," Kalen corrected. "The T-Core were preparing to annex a resource-rich moon that humanity had earmarked for future terraforming. Negotiations stalled. The human ambassador at the time presented a red folder. It contained a detailed analysis of the T-Core's military chain of command, their logistical weaknesses, and the precise velocity and trajectory of a single, small asteroid many light-years away. The projection stated that if the T-Core fleet moved to occupy the moon, the gravitational distortions of their ships would alter the asteroid's path, just enough to send it on a collision course with the T-Core homeworld in 112 years. A complete extinction event. The T-Core withdrew their fleet within the hour. They could have been bluffing, Vorlag argued, but his conviction was wavering. "The humans provided their math," Kalen said. "The T-Core ran their own calculations. The human projection was correct. They did not threaten to move the asteroid. They merely pointed out that the T-Core's own actions would." The silence in the room deepened. The story was famous, a cautionary tale told to junior diplomats. But there was another story, a more obscure and far more disturbing one, that had always captivated Kalen's analytical mind. "There is another file," Kalen began, his internal lattices vibrating with a mixture of scholarly curiosity and a strange, primal dread. "From the early days of their expansion, before Concordance was built, a theoretical exercise. The human military command was tasked with formulating a response to a hypothetical invasion by a species they called the cryptic, a non-sentient, locust-like swarm from outside the galactic plane. The scenario was a worst-case one. Earth had fallen and humanity was scattered." "A war game," Vorlag dismissed. "Strategic projection," Kalen insisted. "They generated a red folder for their own internal use. It listed 6 primary counterresponses. The first 5 were strategically sound, if grim. Option 1, a guerrilla war bleeding the cryptic across 1,000 systems. Option 2, a scorched earth retreat detonating stars to create a galactic firewall. Option 3, seek an alliance with the Gthar hegemony. Option 4, bioweapon deployment targeting cryptic biology. Option 5, retreat to a series of hidden deep space arc colonies to return in a millennium. All of them were feasible, quantifiable." Kalen paused, letting the weight of the moment build. "But it was the 6th protocol that my predecessors found so anomalous." And what was it? Vorlag asked, his multifaceted eyes focused intently on Kalen. It was not a strategy. It was a statement of transformation. 3 words. Kalen projected the words into the space between them, stark white against the obsidian black. We become you. Vorlag stared at the words. Meaningless theatrics. What does that even mean? They would start eating planets and laying eggs. The archivists who discovered it debated its meaning for cycles, Kalen said. Some believed it was a reference to a biological gambit, altering their own DNA to mimic the Kuruk, perhaps to infiltrate or subvert them. Others saw it as a psychological threat, a promise to become as mindless and consuming as their enemy. A vow of total, self-annihilating war. But none of the interpretations felt complete. It was a strategic dead end, a line of cryptic poetry in a document of cold calculus. And that, Vorlag, is what makes the humans so utterly terrifying. Not their weapons or their fleets or even their chillingly accurate mathematics. Turned his perception towards the sealed human sector. It is their capacity for a 6th option, the one you can't predict, the one that breaks the rules of logic and strategy itself. And as we sit here, Ambassador Rostova is in that room with a new folder. And we have no idea what inevitable outcome it describes, or what poetry it might contain. The station remained locked in stasis. Day bled into day, a meaningless distinction in a place of artificial suns. For the assembled diplomats, time was now measured in meals consumed in tense silence and sleep cycles plagued by anxious speculation. The red folder's presence was a low-frequency hum of dread that vibrated through the station's very hull. Vorlag, a being of action, was unraveling. He convened emergency councils with the other major powers, the phlegmatic Pyrians, the shrewd Centaurians, the unified Vorn clans. The meetings were fruitless, devolving into cycles of accusation and fear. Who had provoked the humans? Was it the Gethar's aggressive expansion in the Perseus Vale? The Centaurians' new tariff on hypercoolants? Every delegate saw the shadow of the red folder falling across their own recent actions. Kalen, however, withdrew. The political maneuvering was a distraction, a symptom. The disease, he was beginning to suspect, lay in the fundamental nature of humanity itself. He retreated deep into the Xylosian archives, a silent, cold space where information was stored not on screens or disks, but as resonant frequencies within vast, perfectly grown crystals. He requested access to the most restricted files. The unredacted primary contact reports, the first anthropological studies, the raw biological data. He began not with their wars or their politics, but with their genesis. Planet Earth. A world they described with a strange mixture of nostalgic reverence and brutal pragmatism. It was a planet of extraordinary biodiversity, but also of extraordinary violence. Competition was coded into its very ecosystems. And at the pinnacle of that bloody pyramid, a position they had seized with flint and fire and relentless ingenuity, were the humans. He projected the biological data into his matrix. He saw their sensory organs first. 2 eyes, set close together in the front of their skull. He cross-referenced this morphology with the station's 37 species. The Vorn, grazers from a plains world, had eyes on the sides of their heads, granting a panoramic view for spotting danger. The Centaurians, aquatic filter feeders, had sensory nodes all over their bodies. The Gethar, with their compound eyes, saw the world in a mosaic of overlapping images. But forward-facing, stereoscopic vision like that of the humans, it was rare. It served one primary evolutionary purpose: to track prey, to judge distance, to focus. To hunt, the realization was not a sudden spark, but a slow, cold dawn. Kalen had spent his long life studying history, politics, art. He had always approached humanity as a peer, another species that had stumbled out of its gravity well and into the stars. He had been wrong. He had been studying a diplomat when he should have been studying a wolf. He delved deeper, his quest now imbued with a chilling new focus. He read about their prehistory. They were not the strongest species on their world, nor the fastest. Their advantage was twofold. First, stamina. They were persistent hunters. They would identify a target, a beast larger and faster than themselves, and simply not stop. They would pursue it for hours, for days, across vast distances, until the prey collapsed from sheer exhaustion. They did not win with a sudden strike but with attrition, with the relentless, soul-crushing certainty of their pursuit. Second, their adaptability. When the climate cooled, they did not migrate. They harvested other animals for their skins and mastered fire. When prey became scarce, they did not starve. They domesticated lesser species, penning them for slaughter, and then, in an act of supreme dominance, they began to domesticate plants. They did not adapt to their environment. They forced their environment to adapt to them. They were the only species on record to have single-handedly triggered a mass extinction event on their own planet long before they had achieved spaceflight. Kalen felt a resonance of pure, unadulterated horror. He had seen their wars, their atrocities, their capacity for self-destruction. But he had always contextualized it as the growing pains of a young, volatile species. He saw now that he had been looking through the wrong end of the telescope. Their wars were not an aberration. They were a continuation. When they had run out of animals to hunt and continents to conquer, they had simply turned their predatory instincts upon themselves. He sought out Vorlag, finding him in a sparring chamber, venting his frustration by wrestling with a combat drone. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and the Gethar's agitated pheromones. "They are predators," Kalen transmitted, foregoing any preamble. Vorlag ripped a metal arm from the drone and tossed it aside. "We all have armies, Kalen. The Vorn can trample a city. My people can crack a moon. This is not new." "Don't understand," Kalen insisted, his frequency vibrating with urgency. "Your people fight for resources, for territory, for the propagation of the hegemony. The Vorn fight when threatened. It is logical, it is defensive, it is the action of prey, even powerful prey. The humans are different. They hunt." He began to project the data, the images, the concepts, the forward-facing eyes. The persistence hunt, the reshaping of an entire planet's biosphere. "Look at their language," Kalen urged. "They hunt for a bargain. They prey on the weak. Their corporate leaders are sharks. A desirable partner is a catch. Their entire lexicon is soaked in the blood of the chase. Their foundational myths are not of peaceful coexistence, but of heroes slaying monsters, of conquering the wilderness, of defeating an enemy." Vorlag's agitated movement slowed. His multifaceted eyes for the first time seemed to focus on a single, terrifying point. "Their strategic thinking," Kalen continued, the pieces locking into place with chilling precision, "is a predatory adaptation. They do not react. They anticipate. They study their target, learn its habits, its weaknesses, its patterns. They wait for the moment of maximum advantage. And then they orchestrate a conclusion that is so efficient, so total, it appears inevitable." The red folder. It wasn't a political document. It was the final, silent moment of the stalk, just before the kill. It was the wolf's shadow falling over the deer. The deer might not have seen the wolf before that moment, but the wolf had been there all along, watching, planning, ensuring the outcome. And then, the final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. So perfect and so horrifying that Kalen almost recoiled from it. "We become you?" he whispered in a tight, focused beam to Vorlag. The Gethar ambassador remained motionless. "It wasn't poetry," Kalen explained, his voice a low thrum of dawning comprehension. "It was the ultimate expression of the predatory mind. To defeat an enemy, you must understand it completely. You must understand how it thinks, how it moves, how it lives. You must immerse yourself in its being so thoroughly that you can predict its every move. You must, in essence, become it, not biologically, strategically, psychologically." It was a promise to learn everything about the Kuruk swarm, to adopt their hive mind tactics, their disregard for the individual, their relentless consumption, and then to do it better, to outswarm the swarm, to become a more perfect monster, to destroy the original, to hunt their very identity to extinction. A new kind of silence filled the sparring chamber. It was not the absence of sound, but the presence of a vast, cold understanding. Vorlag looked at his own powerful limbs, at the shattered drone. He had always seen strength in terms of physical power, of economic might, of military force. He had been preparing for a fight against a rival species. He now understood he was facing something else entirely. He was not facing a rival. He was being studied by a predator. And somewhere in the sealed human quarter, Ambassador Eva Rostova sat with her weary eyes, the final judgment of a hunt that her prey did not even know had begun. The red folder on her desk was not a threat. It was the conclusion. The chase was already over. They were merely waiting to be told. The summons arrived on the 5th day. It was not a request but a notification. The senior diplomatic corps will convene in Chamber Primus in 1 hour to receive the findings of the human strategic projection mandate. The air in Chamber Primus was thick enough to be a physical weight. Kalen felt it pressing on his crystalline structure. The chamber was a perfect circle, designed to imply equality, but today it felt like an arena. The delegates sat in their designated alcoves, a gallery of nervous glances and tense postures. Vorlag was a statue carved from obsidian and rage, his usual boisterous presence compressed into a dense, dangerous silence. He now understood, and that understanding had curdled into a cold, profound fury. The main doors hissed open. Ambassador Eva Rostova entered alone. She moved with an economy of motion that Kalen now recognized as predatory grace. There was no wasted energy. Her dark uniform seemed to absorb the light. Her face was pale, etched with lines of fatigue that had not been there 5 days ago. She carried the red folder in one hand. She walked to the center of the chamber and placed it on the central podium. The sound it made, a soft, definitive thud, was the loudest thing Kalen had ever heard. "Delegates," she began, her voice calm and even, carrying to every corner of the room without technological aid. It was a voice trained to command attention. "I regret the disruption to the vital work of this council. The invocation of a strategic projection mandate is not a decision taken lightly. It is invoked only when our analytical models show a developing situation reaching a point of irreversible, high-consequence outcome. It is a tool of last resort, intended not to create conflict, but to prevent it by illuminating the path we are all on." Ambassador Vorlag rose to his full, intimidating height. "Illumination, ambassador, or intimidation? You have held the diplomatic functions of this galaxy hostage for 5 days. You speak of prevention, but this feels like coercion. This feels like a weapon pointed at our heads." Rostova's gaze met his. There was no fear in her eyes. There was no aggression. There was only a profound, weary clarity. "A projection is not a threat, Ambassador Vorlag. It is a weather forecast. You can dislike the prediction of a hurricane, but that does not make the meteorologist a terrorist. We are merely the ones who have done the math." Her eyes swept the room. "We do this because our defining trait as a species is a deep-seated, perhaps pathological, aversion to wasted effort. Conflict is the ultimate waste. War is a failure of imagination and a collapse of logic. We present these projections to prove that a conflict's outcome is already decided, to make the act of engaging in it a logical absurdity." Before Vorlag could retort, Kalen sent out a clear, resonant frequency. "Ambassador Rostova," her gaze shifted to him. For a moment he felt the full weight of that forward-facing predatory focus. He felt seen. He felt analyzed. "Before you reveal the contents of that folder," Kalen continued, his voice steady, "I must ask. For the historical record, for clarity, the 6th protocol against the hypothetical Kuruk invasion, the phrase 'we become you.' My colleagues saw it as theatrics. I have developed a new hypothesis." "What did it mean?" A flicker of something, surprise, respect, crossed Rostova's face. It was the first break in her implacable mask. She inclined her head slightly. "Your hypothesis is correct, analyst-historian Kalen," she said, her voice dropping a fraction, becoming less of a proclamation and more of a confession. "It meant that in the face of an existential, consuming threat, our final strategic option was to become a superior version of that threat. We would have studied the Kuruk hive mind, their pheromonal communication, their swarm logistics, their life cycle, and we would have replicated it in ourselves. Not through genetics, but through technology and psychological conditioning. We would have networked our fleets, our soldiers, our very minds into a collective consciousness that mirrored theirs, but enhanced with human ingenuity and strategic cunning. We would have sacrificed our individuality, the very thing we claim to be fighting for, to create a war machine capable of out-hiving the hive. We would have become them in order to erase them. It was a projection of strategic assimilation, a promise to win no matter the cost to our own soul." A profound, horrified silence descended upon the chamber. Vorlag sank back into his seat, his chitinous plate seeming to shrink. The delegates exchanged looks of pure dread. The mystery of the sixth protocol was solved, and the answer was more terrifying than any of them had imagined. It wasn't about fighting an enemy. It was about consuming its identity, weaponizing it, and achieving a victory so total it erased the enemy from existence and forever scarred the victor. Rostova let the silence hang for a long moment, allowing the full weight of the revelation to settle. Then her hands moved to the folder. "The current projection," she said, her voice returning to its formal tone, "does not concern a war." She opened the folder. From it, she removed not a document but a small, disc-shaped hollow projector. She placed it on the podium. A three-dimensional image bloomed in the air above it. It was a star chart of a nebula in the trailing edge of the galactic arm, a beautiful, swirling cloud of incandescent gas and dust. Within the cloud, faint, rhythmic pulses of light could be seen, like fireflies in a cosmic fog. 3 months ago, Rostova explained, one of our deep space probes cataloged a new form of life in the Ethelred Nebula. We have named them for now the Lumen. They are a non-technological, silicon-based life form. They appear to live, breed, and communicate entirely through complex, coherent light patterns. We do not yet understand their language, if it can be called that, but we have confirmed they are sentient and possess a complex society. She gestured to the chart. Red lines began to overlay the nebula, signifying planned shipping lanes and resource extraction sites. The Ethelred Nebula is rich in rare heavy elements, vital for next-generation hyperdrive cores. According to the public record, exploration and mining rights have been claimed by 3 consortiums, backed primarily by the Gethar hegemony, the Centaurian Republic, and the Vorn clans. Vorlag looked at the map, a dawning horror on his face. "Your mining operations," Rostova continued, her voice devoid of accusation, a simple statement of fact, "rely on gravimetric resonance drilling. Our models show, with a certainty of 99.97%, that the harmonic frequencies of this drilling will disrupt the lumen's ability to communicate and reproduce. Within 20 standard years, their society will collapse. Within 50, they will be functionally extinct. Within 75, the last pulse of light will fade." She let the image hang in the air. An entire species blinking out of existence not through malice but through carelessness. An accidental genocide. "That," she said, her voice now hard as diamond, "is the first half of the projection. The death of a nascent sentient species at the hands of this council." She paused. "The second half of the projection concerns humanity's response." The image of the nebula vanished, replaced by a complex, flowing chart of economic dependencies, trade routes, and political alliances. It was the network that held the Galactic Council together. "If this council proves itself incapable of preventing such an extinction," Rostova stated, "if you demonstrate that your ambition and negligence make you an existential threat to new life in this galaxy, then humanity will classify you as a failed system, a rogue variable that must be contained." Red lines began to sever the connections on the chart. "We will not declare war. War is messy, inefficient. Instead, we will begin a systematic protocol of quarantine and containment. We will collapse your financial markets by introducing superior, cheaper alternatives to your primary exports. We will sever your trade alliances by offering your partners better terms. We will shatter your military power not by attacking your fleets, but by acquiring controlling interests in your weapons manufacturers and selling your own technologies back to your rivals at a loss. We will isolate you economically, politically, and technologically. We will build a cage around you made not of walls and guns, but of logic and market forces. You will be left with your worlds and your systems, but you will never expand again. You will never threaten another nascent species again. We will ensure it." She switched off the projector. The room was utterly still. "This is not a threat," she said for the final time. She closed the red folder. The sound was a judge's gavel. "It is a projection, an inevitable outcome, the extinction of the lumen followed by your containment. Or a different outcome. The data is clear. The math is sound. The choice of which future comes to pass has always been yours." Ambassador Eva Rostova turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving the red folder on the podium. She left behind a silence filled with the echoes of a choice that had just been forced upon them. Save an unknown species they had never met, or face a cold, calculating and complete strangulation at the hands of a species that saw the galaxy not as a community, but as a complex equation it was determined to solve. Kalen looked at Vorlag. The Gethar's rage had evaporated, replaced by something far colder, comprehension. They had been preparing for a fight for resources. They had just been handed a test of their soul. Kalen finally understood. Humans were not just apex predators of life. They were apex predators of timelines. They hunted and killed futures they deemed unacceptable. And in the center of the chamber, the red folder sat not as a weapon, but as a monument to a dead future, waiting to see if another would be born in its place. The relationship between humanity and the galaxy had just been fundamentally and irrevocably changed. It was no longer a negotiation between peers. It was a lesson being taught by a patient, terrifying, and utterly relentless hunter. And the lesson had only just begun.